everyone for coming. My name is Gabriel Ritter. I am the director of the Art Design and Architecture Museum. I just wanted to start tonight by saying that the museum and myself as a professor, we stand with our TAs and graduate students in the strike and fight for a living wage, so I'm also I'm very happy to see some of the here, so thank you for joining us. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sophia Kincaid, who is the curator of God's Glory and Spirituality. So I will leave it to her.
I have the pleasure today to introduce our last speaker for the lectures associated with the God's Glory and Spirituality exhibition, Davide Gasparotto. Davide is Senior Curator of Paintings and Chair of Curatorial Affairs at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. A native of Bassano del Grappa, he studied the history of art and classical archaeology at the University of Pisa and the Scuola Normale Superiore. From 1996 to 2014, he held appointments at the Fondazione Piero della Francesca in San Sepolcro, the National Gallery of Parma, the Soprintendenza ai Beni Artistici e Storici di Parma e Piacenza, and the Galleria Estenza in Modena. He joined the Getty as senior curator in December 2014. And his research interest includes painting, sculpture, and the decorative arts of the Renaissance, the rediscovery of classical antiquity between the Middle Ages and the 18th century, and the history of collecting. Thank you, Davide.
So, thank you very much, Sophia, for this very kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for coming. And so, I'm going to talk about this quite esoteric subject, which now is the Italian, mostly Italian, not exclusively Italian medals of the Renaissance portraying women. One of the most celebrated portraits of the Italian Renaissance, the so-called Montefeltro diptych by Piero della Francesca, today in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, featured the Duke of Urbino Federico da Montefeltro and his wife Battista Sforza. The two figures are shown in profile, facing each other. They inhabit the same space, suggested by the fall of light and the continuity of the rolling landscape in the background, representing the area of the Marche region over which they ruled in central Italy. Urbino was the city where they lived. The chromatic contrast between the bronze skin tones used for Federico and the pale tones of Battista Sforza is striking. Her pallor not only respects the aesthetic conventions which were fashionable during the Renaissance, but could also allude to her untimely death in 1472, so this should be probably a commemorative portrait of her. On the back of the panels, the couple are featured being carried triumphantly on ancient wagons, accompanied by Christian virtues. The Latin inscription paid tribute to the couple's moral values. The presence of the images on the reverse side suggests that the two paintings, now set in a modern frame, like a neo-Renaissance frame, would once have been part of a diptych. They would have been hinged together, and they would have been much closer in some way. The allegorical scenes on the back of the portraits are quite unique, and their meaning is enhanced by the inscriptions on the simulated architectural edge below them. Their iconography is based on a complex tradition dating back to the Roman triumph, which was further enriched by a series of allegorical poems by the 14th century Italian poet Francesco Petrarca, known here as Petrarch. The Roman triumphs celebrated military victories, but Petrarch's triumphs were allegories of love, chastity, death, fame, time, and eternity. Federico's triumphal car, the one on the left, is drawn by a team of white horses as was traditional for victorious commanders in antiquity. He is accompanied by allegorical figures of the four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, the attributes of a good leader. Federico was indeed a victorious commander, famed for his excellence. As one of the greatest military commanders of the period, he was honored with a live triumph by the city of Florence in the summer of 1472 to celebrate his defeat of Volterra, the city of Volterra, on behalf of the Medici, rulers of Florence. Piero's painting may well allude to that event, so this triumph of Frederick. Battista's triumphal car is drawn by unicorns. I don't know if you can see them here, but they are unicorns, symbolic of chastity, and carries the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. These extraordinary portraits contain in some way all the essential ingredients that are also features of the Renaissance method. A portrait in profile, a double-sided composition, the combination of word and image. Like these portraits, through a skillful combination of portraiture and allegory, text and image, the medal celebrates an individual's unique qualities: power, accomplishments, family status, dynastic links, aspirations, beliefs, and significant life events. It is significant that a celebrated humanist of the 15th century, the one you see here, Guarino Veronese, Guarino from Verona, wrote that in one of his books, imaginis sine litteris mute sunt, so images without words, without letters, are silent. In some way, with its unique, inextricable combination of words and image, the medal represented the most appealing artistic genre for a public of cultivated humanists and courtiers, and it is certainly one of the most original creations of Renaissance culture. Although inspired by ancient coins, medals do not have a value as currency, and they are not controlled or issued by a central authority according to established weights, denominations, and materials. They are private objects of celebratory or commemorative nature, made at the request of single individuals and meant to be held in the hand and observed at close range. Coins are struck at an official mint, while medals are either struck or cast, the latter method being most common in the Renaissance, and they can be cast in different metals, in lead, in bronze, in silver, in gold. In the exhibition here, you have mostly cast medals, some in silver, some in lead, some in bronze. And the medals I'm going to show tonight are mostly, maybe all cast. So usually they are bigger than a struck medal, because during the Renaissance the technique didn't allow to strike larger pieces with the traditional striking method using dies. But cast, you had to do more in modern clay or in another soft material, so when you cast, you can have a larger piece. The four coins are issued in large numbers, while medals were normally produced in few examples for distribution among a selected audience. The formula of the portrait in profile has obviously a strong association with the cult of classical antiquity that was so pervasive in Italian humanistic circles of the 15th and 16th centuries. A contemporary observer would have been aware that classical authors, such as Pliny the Elder in his Naturalis Historia, associated the birth of individual portraiture in ancient Greece with the profile, and also with modeling in clay. I quote here from a passage from the Naturalis Historia, where Pliny writes, "On painting we have now said enough, and more than enough. But it will be only proper to append some accounts of the plastic art. Butades, a potter of Sicyon, was the first who invented at Corinth the art of modeling portraits in the earth, which he used in his trade. It was through his daughter that he made the discovery, who, being deeply in love with a young man about to depart on a long journey, traced the profile of his face, as thrown upon the wall by the light of the lamp. Upon seeing this, her father filled in the outline by compressing clay upon the surface, and so made the face in relief, which he then hardened by fire along with other articles of pottery." So this anecdote became very, very popular since the Renaissance, and it stayed popular, as we can see here, because this painting which I'm showing is not from the 15th or 16th century, but it's from the 18th century by the English painter Joseph Lighton-Berry, where he sort of present to us this invention in some way of the portrait in profile. Pliny's anecdote is recounted by several 15th century writers, among them by the sculptor Lorenzo Ghiberti in his Commentari, one of the first treatises on art of the period, where in the first book Ghiberti summarizes his knowledge of the development of the art of sculpture and painting from classical antiquity to his own days. Humanists were also aware of the fact that it was through antique coins that it was possible to recognize the appearance of the most illustrious individuals from Greek and Roman history. The poet Petrarch, which we already mentioned, already in the 14th century compared the features of emperors and empresses on ancient coins with the literary descriptions offered by ancient authors, also noticing the difference. Comparing the literary description with the actual coins, he was able to, for example, say that a certain writer was wrong because in the medal the same person was sort of portrayed in a different way. So it's in this page of his Historia Imperialis, the humanist from Verona, Giovanni Mansionario, draws some ancient coins where he writes about a certain Roman emperor. And so this is sort of the beginning, in some way, also of modern archaeology or modern numismatics, because coins, together with inscriptions, became really, at this moment, primary sources for the reconstruction of ancient history. In some way more important than literary writings, because literary writings were transmitted through the Middle Age, through a chain, while coins and inscriptions directly came to the Renaissance as from antiquity, so they were more trustworthy in some way than literary writings. And also Giovanni Boccaccio, the other great 14th century Italian writer, in his book on famous women, was able to talk about the celebrated beauty of the Empress Faustina the Younger, looking at the Roman coins where she was portrayed. And Boccaccio writes, "Faustina possessed such exquisite grace as to make it credible that something divine had been infused into her mortal body. To prevent her beauty from being consumed by old age or death, it was decreed that her portrait as a young girl and then as a mature woman should be engraved on gold, silver, and copper coins, and thus it still survives today. Even through the expression of the mouth, the movement of the eyes, the vivid complexion, and the cheerfulness of her countenance are missing from such likenesses. The features, nonetheless, attest to extraordinary beauty." The popularity in the Renaissance, and I'm showing here two Roman coins with portraits of the two Faustinas, which were popular during the Renaissance. Faustina the Elder, which was the wife of Emperor Antoninus Pius, with her typical, very elegant headdress, and Faustina the Younger, the wife of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, more famous for her sort of more lovers than which is the one about which Boccaccio talks in this passage. But actually the popularity of both Faustinas, especially the elder in the Quattrocento, is proved by the recreation of her portrait in form of medals and marble reliefs, like this one I'm showing, the medal by the sculptor and architect Antonio Avellino, known as Filarete, who was a pupil of Donatello, who became famous for his bronze door for the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, and he recreates the portrait of Faustina based on antique Roman coins, and then he imagines this scene of concordia, of the encounter between husband and wife in the reverse, when they shake their hands in some way. And then in these marble reliefs by Mino da Fiesole, both are recreation of the figure of Faustina the Elder, who was obviously admired for her virtue. Many medals of the 15th and 16th century define their female subjects in relation to a male relative, usually the father or the husband of the sitter. For example, the Empress Isabella of Portugal appears here on a medal by Leone Leoni as the wife of Charles V. So, Diva Isabella Augusta, Caroli Quinti Uxor, so the divine Isabella of Portugal, Empress, wife, Uxor, wife of Charles I. And then in the back, her beauty is celebrated. The inscription says that she's even more beautiful than the famous three graces. And then also, for example, in the medal of Ippolita Gonzaga, also by Leone Leoni, she's described also as Filia Ferdinandi, so the daughter of Ferdinand Gonzaga. So she's defined with her association with her father. The legends on these medals reflect the gender-based nature of power in the period, but also more immediately highlight the general different roles played by men and women in the production of medals. For although it is the beauty and virtue of the women that are ostensibly commemorated in these works, it was usually their male partner or father who commissioned and paid for these medals. And the legends both served as a reminder that the woman's glory depended on the man, and also allowed those men to share that glory. The role of wife is one of the most frequently celebrated in Renaissance medals of women, and the occasion for the creation of a medal would have been the wedding itself. This is, for example, the case of this medal attributed to Niccolò Fiorentino, artist from Florence, depicting the young bride Giovanna degli Albizzi, who in 1486 married the wealthy Lorenzo Tornabuoni. So again, the inscription, Joanna Albizza Uxor Laurentine Tornabuoni, cioè Giovanna degli Albizzi, the wife of Lorenzo Tornabuoni. The necklace of pearls confers that the sitter is a bride. For pearls, symbol of the Immaculate Virgin and thus of virginal purity, were traditional elements of wedding costumes. Giovanna unfortunately died in childbirth only 2 years later, in 1488, when she was only 20 years old, and she was immortalized in the posthumous portrait by Domenico Ghirlandaio that you see here on the right. The portrait is set against a background with a niche containing various objects referring to the sitter's refined tastes and character. Jewels, a string of coral beads in the background, most probably a rosary, and a book there. The cartellino, so the piece of paper there, behind her holds an epigram by the Latin poet Martial, which reads, "Art, if only you could reproduce the character and spirit, there would be no finer portrait in the world." Sort of a topos, an ancient topos that, if the hand could reproduce character and spirit, this would be the most beautiful portrait in the world. Complementing Giovanna's lovely visage, the reverse of the medal presents the three Graces, who stand on a plinth side by side with arms interlocked. Here, the mythological trio embodies the exemplary female virtues of charity, beauty, and love. The figure of chastity holds sprigs of wheat, symbols of fertility, while love holds a stem of myrtle, emblem of Venus and marriage. The motif of the three Graces derives from ancient representations, such as the famous group today at the center of the Piccolomini Library in Siena, which was recorded in Rome in the possession of Cardinal Prospero Colonna at the end of the 15th century. So it was a famous cultural group that became, in some way, antique, that became the model for many Renaissance representations of the three Graces. Another famous beauty of the Quattrocento, which is also the emblem of the exhibition in some way, was Isotta degli Atti from Rimini. The 13-year-old daughter of a merchant, she inspired the passion of Sigismondo Pandolfo Malatesta, the ruler of Rimini. The date 1446, here on the reverse, commemorates the year Sigismondo consolidated his political power and won Isotta as his mistress. He was at the time still married with another woman. Later, after the death of Sigismondo's first wife, Polissena Sforza, in 1449, Isotta became his wife. So the medals probably post-date 1449, but they record the date of 1446, which is the year when they met and they became lovers. Sigismondo embedded the portrait medals of himself and Isotta in the walls and foundation of his buildings as a legacy of his triumphant reign. A letter of the humanist Timoteo Maffei to the author of the medal, the painter and illuminator Matteo dei Pasti, mentions exemplars of the medal cast in gold, silver and bronze by Matteo. And I quote here, and I translate from late Latin, buried in scattered places or placed within walls or sent to foreign nations. This is an important element for the comprehension of the function of medals, which were objects that were traveling objects. They were sent to other people to show the features of, people, and also to send some messages. Matteo captures the teenage beauty with tenderness and sensitivity in a high-necked dress, with her gaze slightly lifted, her lips closed in a calm smile, and her chin a little withdrawn. The teenage girl projects a wide-eyed charm. The filmy veil and delicately waving strands of hair enhance the effect of softness. The elephant, portrayed on the medal's reverse, is a masterpiece of animal representation, at once naturalistic and richly symbolic. As one of the favorite heraldic devices of the Malatesta family of Rimini, the elephant signifies regal strength and the fame that confers immortality. The same emblem of the elephant, just wanted to, go back 1 second to say that the inscription is saying that she was the beauty, for her virtue and beauty, she was the pride of Italy in some way. She was a sort of a national beauty. And on the back of the river, the signature of the medalist. I was saying that the same emblem of the elephant is ubiquitous in the sculptural decoration of the Tempio Malatestiano, the medieval church of San Francesco in the heart of Rimini, that the Florentine architect Leo Battista Alberti transformed in a temple to the glory of Sigismondo and his family. So this church, Franciscan church, became sort of a temple for the glory, the mundane glory in some way of the Malatesta family. We don't know know who commissioned this medal of Cecilia Gonzaga, the daughter of Gianfrancesco Gonzaga, the Marquis and ruler of Mantua, capital of one of the most flourishing coasts of northern Italy. What is sure is that Cecilia must have been a truly remarkable individual. She's the woman on the left in the medal. This is another woman that I will tell you about. Born in 1426, Cecilia became a star pupil in the famous school founded in Mantua by Vittorino da Feltre, the Casa Gioiosa, or Joyous Home, a famous school, an accomplished classical scholar and one of the most learned young persons in Italy. She refused to marry and in 1445 became a Clarissa nun in the convent of Santa Paola in Mantua. Although she was already in the convent when this medal was produced in 1447, yet the artist Pisanello, great accomplished medal maker of the 15th century, we may even consider him sort of the father of the Italian medal, chose to represent her in secular court dress, comparable to the one worn by the princess of the house of Este today in the Louvre. So we don't know the identity of this other woman portrayed by the same artist Pisanello in painting in this picture in the Louvre, but using the exact same formula, the profile and the elegant dress, the elegant headdress, very closely related. Her characterization in the inscription on the obverse as Virgos, Virgin, is indicated in a symbolic way with the figuration of the reverse of the medal. The half-naked maiden represents innocence and chastity, and according to medieval tradition, it is only a woman with such virtues who can subdue the fierce and immortal unicorn, which is represented here as a sort of a big, gigantic goat, but actually it's a unicorn because it has the long horn. This tranquil, haunting scene is set in the barren and rocky landscape common to other medals by Pisanello, and its poetic aura is enhanced by the appearance of the crescent moon, which is also another symbol of chastity. I'm used to the goddess Diana, who was the chaste goddess of antiquity. Sometimes, identified as the moon. A type of medal that celebrated women with no direct reference to men whatsoever does not give their subjects full name, but rather a first name and a town or other locality. This is, for example, the case of Faustina from Rome. Faustina, you can see Faustina Romana. An anonymous medal where the inscriptions and the figuration on the obverse suggest that she was most probably a famed Roman courtesan. The OP, so Faustina Ro OP, you see on the obverse, has been interpreted as Omnium Pulcherrima, so the most beautiful of all. And the depiction of the myth of Leda and the swan on the reverse, one of the famous loves of Jupiter, has clearly, in this case, clearly an erotic meaning. Many medals with portraits of women and the indication of their town of origin has been interpreted in the past as portraits of courtesans, but this is not necessarily always the case, for those representations are rather an offshoot of the long-standing tradition of painted portraits of beautiful women, the so-called belle, the beauties. The likenesses may have been taken from famous courtesans or professional models, but the medals are more likely to have been intended as representation not of individual beauty, but rather of types of beauty that could be linked with various Italian towns and provinces. Let's now turn to women who were directly involved in commissioning medals. An especially interesting case is represented by Isabella d'Este, the Marquis of Mantua. Isabella was brought up at the artistically minded court of Ferrara, and she continued to pursue her artistic interests after her marriage to Francesco Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua. She was, we know very well, an avid collector of both classical antiquities and works of art by the leading contemporary painters and sculptors in Italy, enjoying close association with the painter Andrea Mantegna, who executed a series of allegorical canvases destined to her studiolo, a very special room within her private apartments, following her detailed instructions. The sculptor and courtier Gian Cristoforo Romano often acted as her agent in acquiring objects, probably including the many ancient coins that she possessed. As with her other artistic commissions, Isabella was deeply involved in an intense dialogue with the maker. And Gian Cristoforo Romano's medal of Isabella, which you can see here, is a particularly sophisticated reworking of images found on coins of Roman emperors, focusing on her abilities as a peacekeeping ruler during the many absences of her mercenary husband. He was almost always out of town, busy in warfare. The object that you see on screen, the one here, is the item cast in gold and surrounded by a rich mounting with rubies, diamonds, and enamels that she kept for herself. While other versions of the medal, in bronze and lead, were sent out to other rulers, friends, and admirers all over Italy. Isabella's features on the obverse of the medal are close to the famous portrait drawing of her by Leonardo da Vinci, that you see here on the left, drawing a large cartoon executed in preparation of a painted portrait that was never completed by Leonardo. But in the medal, she wears a simpler, close-fitting, square-necked dress that reflects the fashion of the late 1490s. The elegantly swirling hairstyle is distinctive and may have been inspired by hair arrangements on Roman coins. On the reverse, a winged figure in classical dress holds a palm branch in her left hand and a short staff or wand in her right, while a serpent rises up in front of her. The figure, which has been interpreted in various ways as a victory with victory or an allegory of peace or an allegory of good government, is depicted below a Sagittarius, up there, Isabella's astrological ascendant sign, with the inscription on account of high merit, Venerentum Ergo. Isabella believed that she merited commemoration through her star-given ability to govern. We have quite a lot of information on how Isabella distributed exemplars of the her medal. She gave it to many poets and nobles, and a contemporary, the Queen Consort of Aragon, Germaine de Foix, commented on the beauty of the portrait, kissing it, I quote, 1,000 times, the example that Gian Cristoforo brought to her in Naples, and remarking that the likeness revealed un grande ingegno, a great talent, a great mind, of which she had already heard many times. She never met Isabella in person, and her reaction reminds us of the observation on portraiture made by Battista Alberti in his treatise on painting. I quote from Alberti. Painting, and in this case we can think the same about sculpture, contains a divine force which not only makes absent men present, as friendship is said to do, but moreover makes the dead seem almost alive. Even after many centuries, they are recognized with great pleasure and with great admiration for the painter. Thus, the face of a man who is already dead certainly lives a long life through painting, and obviously we can say the same for sculpture, even more durable because the metal is a very durable material. Other 16th century medals of female rulers fully revealed, because Isabella in some way, she was not really a ruler, she was a very independent in court, she sometimes substituted her husband in official political duties, but she was not the ruler. But there are cases in the 16th century of real rulers, and their medals, directly commissioned by them, they really fully reveal with their sophisticated political allegories the significant propagandistic nature of these objects. Margaret of Parma, for example, she was the legitimate daughter of Emperor Charles V, and when in 1559 her stepbrother, King Philip II of Spain, left the Low Countries to go back to Spain, he asked her to become the Governor General of the turbulent province, agitated by endless conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. At the end, it was one of the provinces of the Kingdom of Spain. The medal that you see here in comparison with the beautiful portrait of her by Antonis More, which is today in Berlin, a contemporary painter, the medal they wore a very similar dress, as you can see. The medal and also the headdress is very similar. The medal was executed by the Flemish goldsmith and sculptor Jacob Jongeling, and in 1567, when Margaret was 45 years old, the day her age is there under the truncated arm is indicated. We know that the allegory on the reverse was conceived by Captain Francesco De Marchi, who was attached to the person of the Duchess, who was a sort of a secretary. And the first two examples of the medal were sent by him, cast in silver, were sent by him to Rome, to the Pope, Paul III, and to Cardinal Alessandro Farnese. We have to remember that Margaret was the wife of the Cardinal's brother, Ottavio, Duke of Parma and Piacenza. In fact, she is the Duchess of Parma and Piacenza, on top of being Governor General of the Low Countries. So the first two examples were sent to Rome to her relatives, basically. The reverse shows a female figure standing on a rock, buttered by wind and waves, wearing a laurel wreath, with a sword in the right hand, palm and olive branches in the left. Clearly, the figure, a sort of a piece in arms, is meant to be Margaret herself. And the motto, Favente Deo, if God so wishes, alludes to her efforts to control insurrection and instability. The idea of peace also dominates the iconography of one of the most accomplished medals of the 16th century, the portrait of Maria Tudor, Queen of England from 1553 to 1558, the work of the Italian medalist Jacopo da Trezzo. Mary appears in the medal in a sort of very interesting parallel with Margherita, who appears very similar to the portrait by Antonis More. Even here, Mary appears very similar again to the portrait of herself, again by Antonis More, so the same painter who portrayed Margherita. And the painting was commissioned actually in the same year of the medal in 1554 by Charles V and executed in London by the Flemish artist. So the Flemish artist from Brussels traveled to London to portray the Queen. In both the painting and the medal, which I'm showing here in a marvelous example cast in gold, she wears a pendant jewel, you can see it, pretty big, that is probably to be identified with one sent to her in June 1554 by her future husband, Philip II, the King of Spain. The inscription emphasizes her role as a defender of faith, fidei defensatrix. The medal was probably commissioned by Philip, so by her future husband. They would have married in the August of the same year, 1554, as a tribute to Mary before their wedding, and was produced in London by Jacopo da Trezzo, who was sent there from Madrid by the king with the specific task of portraying the queen. We can imagine a sitting session where Antonis More, maybe, and Jacopo da Trezzo were at the same time taking a portrait, taking a drawing, a little sketch. Maybe Jacopo modeled directly on wax the portrait of the queen while she was sitting. The elaborate reverse symbolizes the peaceful state of the kingdom under Mary, and it is dominated by the figure of a crowned piece setting fire to arms. Again, an iconography book which has classical precedents, Greco-Roman precedents. The cube, this little plinth which stands, the clasp hands, and the scales, so you cannot really see that the cube, clasp hands, and scales are here, are symbols of stability, unity, and justice, respectively. The figures beset by storms on the left are Mary's subject before her accession to the throne, while under her reign they bask in radiant sunlight. So this is the negative, the tempest, the storm, and this is the sunlight, the temple, and the happy people here. And the inscription reads as sight to the blind, Cecis visus, sight to the blind, tranquility to the timid, timidus quies. I would like to end this conversation with 3 examples of medals of women artists. As we know, cultural and social barriers prevented most women to pursue a career as an artist in the early modern period. But over the course of the 16th century especially, some major figures of women painters emerged and attained wide-ranging fame and recognition. It is interesting to check if and how they were portrayed in medals. They are quite rare. An anonymous medal, only with one face, depicts the celebrated painter from Cremona, Sophonisba Missola, who is portrayed elegantly attired as any other aristocratic lady from the period, but with no indication of her profession, but instead just as the daughter of her father, Amilcare, so she's the daughter of Amilcare, Sophonisba, no mention of her profession. More interesting is the medal of another 16th century, late 16th century artist, Lavinia Fontana, signed by the rather obscure medalist Antonio Casoni, active in Rome between the end of the 16th and the beginning of the 17th century. The medal is dated 1611, 3 years before the painters, painting with her right hand and holding a mastick in her left, while on the ground beside her are brushes and a palette on which are dabs of paint. Between the inner and outer border, we also see dividers in square. It has been observed that some of the details correspond closely with the description of pittura, painting, the picture painting, in the famous book Iconologia by Cesare Ripa, like the dishevelled hair and the bend over her mouth, which allude to the fury of inspiration, the dishevelled hair, and the solitude of the artist. The inscription, interesting in Italian, not in Latin, "Through you, joyous state, I am maintained," can also be related to creative inspiration, while the dividers and square are clearly symbols of planning and the intellectual aspect of the painting process. Finally, in the early 1620s, Artemisia Gentileschi's status as a celebrity painter, is documented by the drawing of her hand by Pierre Dumonstier, by a printed portrait, and by a portrait medal very rare. I know only 2 examples of this medal of Artemisia Gentileschi, one in the private collection, one in Berlin. So probably very, very few exemplars were produced, were cast. And it's a medal without a reverse, only the authors with the portrait. In the drawing, she is labeled as excellent and learned Artemisia, gentlewoman of Rome. In the print, as famosissima pittrice, very famous painter. And in the medal, as pictrix celebris, celebrated paintress. The dishevelled hair, interesting element, seems to be again connected to the fury of inspiration. And these are really a feature of all Artemisia's portraits that we know. Artemisia's unkempt hair also characterized her famous self-portrait from the Royal Collection in London, one I show here on the right, which has been, in my opinion, convincingly suggested may represent her as the embodiment of painting itself. Thank you very much.